More calls. Everything I read on every Facebook real estate group and team leaders and brokers are just telling me I need to make more calls. Oh my gosh, how am I gonna keep making more calls? I feel like my ear is numb, my voice is hoarse. It's gotta stop somewhere, right? Let's actually look at the math and look at the perspective on calls. And I can tell you as a team leader, I have seen it, I have heard it, and I think there's a big misperception. And as a team leader, I failed a little bit in really going over this with my team members, and it's really important. So guess what? My team members are gonna be watching this as well. It really comes down to conversations more than it does calls. However, you can't have conversations without making the calls. Now, we could argue about phones versus in-person, open houses, even meeting somebody at the grocery store. Let's just consider all of that a call. It may just not be a telephone call. It may be an in-person calling for the conversation. All that aside, we're gonna look at calls, conversations, to appointments actually met and held, to contracts, to closings. We're gonna reverse engineer this a bit so that way you could really look at what it's gonna take. And one of the things that I hear over and over again and that I see written, it just takes so much effort to make these calls day in and day out when the results are so poor. I made 150 calls yesterday and I only had 2 good conversations. I mean, come on, what's 2 good conversations gonna bring to me? Even if we look at it over a year and say that's 500 conversations, well, 500 conversations may result in, say, 50 appointments. Of those 50 appointments, probably only 25 of them actually show up or aren't canceled. So now I've got 25 appointments. Out of those 25 appointments, I, let's say, have a 65% closing ratio on actually getting a listing or a buyer. So now we're down to, say, 15. And out of those 15, only so many are actually gonna go into contract. Let's say that that's, 13 or so. And out of those 13, 2 of them are gonna fall out. So now I'm left with 11. Now 11's not bad and it's not a bad living, but it's not the ultimate goal that I wanna get to. And to put this much effort in to only get there, well, that just seems so daunting and so not worth it. And again, I'm making 150 calls and 148 of them are no good to begin with. Where does that leave me? Come on, I want more out of this career. Is that something that you resonate with? Is that something maybe you've heard or you feel or you've said to somebody before? Well, let's really factor in on the math. At the beginning of your career, you need to fill your pipeline, right? Your pipeline is those people that you truly believe are going to conduct some form of business, whether buying or selling a home, within a certain time period. I like to use 1 year as the time period. I'd love to say 30 days or even 90 days. 1 year is really the time period I use because the fact of the matter is, if I spoke to somebody today and I made great rapport with them, I knew where they were from, we had some people in common or at least some sort of items in common. I went through the Ford, right? The family, occupation, recreation, and dreams. And I really felt like I connected with this person. However, they lived back east and they had a child in high school and that child wasn't graduating this year. They were graduating next year. So here we are in April of 2024 and maybe they're graduating in May of 2025. So that's actually a little over a year. And that's what we're looking at. Now, am I gonna just kick that person and not follow up with them or let automation take the wheel completely? No, that's somebody that if I really built that rapport, we had a lot in common, we really connected, I'm gonna continue to follow up with them every couple months, ask them how things are going, how their child is doing in school, how things are looking, if they picked a college yet, so on and so forth, if they've looked at the job market out here because they're gonna be moving from the East Coast out here and maybe their job's not a remote work job. I'm gonna go through all of these things and I'm not gonna be bringing up something about houses, right? I may be bringing up something about housing, something about interest rates, something about a new community that's being developed, something about a new sports team that's coming here, something that may be relevant to them, again, based on their conversation. I'm not bringing up things that are relevant to me. I'm bringing up things that are relevant to them. If they don't care about sports or how that's going to affect the real estate economy here in Vegas, then it's not gonna be something that's brought up. I'm really gonna center it around their Ford, right? Around their family, occupation, recreation, and dreams. And that way I'm continuing that rapport and I'm not letting somebody else in on that particular conversation. By letting somebody else in, what I mean is their information is out there. They didn't just happen to click on my site. Maybe it was a referral and I really am the only one they're talking to. Chances are there's 3 or 4 or 5 or even 10 people trying to knock down their door to get their business because they filled out something on some website at some time when it came to Vegas real estate and now they're in somebody else's database. Maybe they've spoken to them, maybe they haven't. Certainly I'm gonna guess that they have not built the rapport that I have. All I need to do is stay top of mind and make sure that I'm reaching out to them, and that way they don't forget about me because the old saying, out of sight, out of mind. One of the things that I really promote to my agents and something I do myself is something called WD-80. Now, jokes aside with this cool little graphic, I'm gonna say WD-80 is the working database. And the 80 that's how many people you should have in your working database. Now you may have a database of 1,000 people. You might even have 400 past clients. Well, those should be separated. Those, in my case, I use an actual pond that I'm the only person in the pond, so the rest of my team can't go fishing in that pond. It's my pond that is my sphere of influence as well as my past clients. That's what's in that pond. Now, there may be other opportunities that have come in over the years that never transacted business, or maybe I was never able to get a hold of them. Maybe when I spoke to them, they were out-of-state buyers and just considering Vegas, and it turned out that they didn't move here. Maybe it's somebody that didn't have the financial means or the credit worthiness. Whatever it is, those shouldn't stay in my working database. The only thing that should be in my working database are the actual people that I've spoken to, had valid conversations with, was able to categorize in a particular bucket, being hot, 0 through 90 days, warm, 90 to 180 days, lukewarm, which is your 180 days to 1 year, and then your cold, which is your 1 year plus. Now again, I'm gonna keep all of those in my database as long as I gathered great rapport. Now, how am I gonna move them out? Well, there's a few different ways that I'm gonna move them out of the database. Those cold that are 12 months plus, and those lukewarm that are 6 months to 12 months, those are gonna be the first that are gonna be moved out. Now, again, I just gave you a scenario where I'm talking to this person and they're a little over a year out and they are a real buyer. So what am I gonna do with those? I'm gonna move those over to an ISA or maybe to some sort of automation that's in my voice, right? It's not gonna be your standard, hey, it's been a while since we've spoken. It's gonna be some text messages, some emails, some of the marketing stuff that I do. It might be a video that I do that I'm sending to them, and maybe it's not specific to them, but I can make it as specific as possible. The text messages, however, I can actually make a little more specific. It would be campaign based and maybe not all around the fact that they're a teacher and when they move out here, so on and so forth. Ultimately, if I happen to see something that's really specific to them and they're not in my working database, but they're still on my mind, I could still, send them a quick ping directly, through the CRM about an article about teachers' pay going up, let's say. Things like that can still be done. However, they're not in my working database. They're not in my everyday, what I'm trying to do. Now, another way that people can move out is that you've disqualified them. It doesn't mean that you just don't have enough space for them. It means you've truly disqualified them. They went into your database, looked like they were ready to do something within the next, say, 180 days. And then they call you back a couple weeks later, and it turns out that the impending nuptials got ruptured and they are no longer getting married. This one is moving back to California, and this one certainly doesn't have the financial means on their own to do it, so they are doing a roommate situation in a rental. Something like that, again, you can move out, let automation hit them up, so that way over time, if this person moves back from California, this person that stayed here but doesn't have the financial means meets somebody else or gets a job promotion or anything of those sorts, you're still top of mind because they're still getting some of your marketing, they're still getting some of your messaging, just not directly from you, because right now your time is valuable, and in order for you to provide top level service, you can only have so many people that you're actually catering to. Another way to move them out is to actually transact business with them. So they go pending and then they close. And once they're closed, you're moving them back to your pond of your past clients and your sphere of influence. So these are a few of the ways to move them out. Now you're going, wait a second, you're talking a lot about your database management. How does this really go back to these calls and all this daunting call talk? Well, the conversations that you need are not just in new prospects. It's not just about these endless dial sessions. It's also about the follow-up, because the fact of the matter is that working database, that WD-80, that is not just automatically going to convert. It takes conversations. That person, again, that you spoke to that's 4 months out, you need to speak to them multiple times in the next 4 months. You can't just say, okay, cool, when you're closer, give me a call. You know I'm here for you. We've got this dialed in. You got it. No finger pistols getting you that business. You've really got to work for that. So each conversation with that person is going to lead to that appointment, which is going to lead to that contract, which is going to lead to that close. One of the biggest misconceptions that I see is that people are thinking that conversations mean a unique conversation with a unique individual. And really what it is another conversation, unique in its own nature, however, with a lot of the same individuals. Oftentimes it's going to take 12, 15, even 25 conversations to get that one individual that you know was serious from the beginning to move along, give you that appointment, or at least maybe you've already had that appointment, but to give you that follow-up because maybe you did the appointment as a buyer's consult 3 months in advance of when they were actually going to move forward on purchasing something. So now you're still following up through those months. And then when it comes time to actually get back together with them for another appointment, to actually go show homes, to find one they love, to write a contract, to get it in escrow, and to get it closed, that's what it took. So how many phone calls did that actually take? How many conversations occurred from that? Now, here's the fun part. Here's a thing that really gets me going and is exciting and should be exciting for all of you. And this is the biggest part that I think is missed. When it comes to the number of conversations you have to have, again, it's not just the new prospect conversations, it's total conversations. And you can have a lot more conversations. You have a much better response rate from that WD-80 than you do from new inbound opportunities. So let's actually look at some of the numbers. So as I mentioned, you're looking for one close. Now you could multiply that by the year and how many closes you're looking for, but we're gonna base it off of one. And in order to have one close, you're gonna need 1.2 contracts. Now that doesn't mean that you might not be out with a client and write 6 offers on 6 different homes because there's multiple offer situations. What I mean is really 1.2 clients that are willing to write contracts. You might end up having to write 5 or 6 or 8 or 10, depending on how the market is, how hot things are, how hot the home they're looking for is, so on and so forth. But really I'm talking about clients. So if you're writing for 1.2 clients, you're gonna get one close, which means you're gonna have fallouts. If you're taking listings, you've probably had a listing expire or withdraw on you. If you're working with buyers, you may have had a buyer that, well, as it turned out in the end, they could not meet all the conditions of the loan. They were maybe fluffing their information a little bit, or I had one where it was a couple and they broke up before we actually ended up getting to the closing table. So we had to cancel that contract. They went their separate ways and neither of them could qualify on their own. So we have different reasons why contracts cancel even though we're that far along. So 1.2 in order to get to one close. Now in order to get to 1.2 buyers or listings, we're talking about a 60% conversion rate on appointments, which means we need 2 appointments. In order to actually have 2 held appointments, industry average is about 50% held appointments. Now you can do a much better job than that by properly qualifying. However, there's a lot of people that overqualify and therefore they miss out on appointment opportunities. So you got to figure out that balance there. But let's say it is 50%. That means you have to have 4 appointments in order to get the 2 appointments that are going to be held to get to the 1.2 contracts to get to the one close. Now, how many conversations does it take to get to an appointment? typically around 10. It's about a 10% conversation to appointment rate if you're doing things right and asking for the appointments. So that would mean 40 conversations have to be made. Now, I looked back in my database for the last 2 years on prospective calls, not database calls, but prospective calls, and the rate of dials to conversations was 4%. The answer rate was somewhere between 12 and 15%, depending on which month or what have you. I think it was 12.2% for the entire 2-year span. However, the conversation rate is different than the connect rate, right? Some people, when you call them, say, hey, this is Alex from LPT Realty, and they go click, right? But the call was connected. Or maybe they talk to you for a moment. Hey, Alex, thanks so much for calling. You know what? I'm really not in the market right now. Maybe you should call me back in about 4 months. Oh, well, what has you out of the market? You know what? I don't have the time to go through that. I'm in the middle of work. Give me a call back in a few months. Bye. And they hang up, right? That's still not a conversation. There was nothing material. There was no rapport built. You didn't get any information from them about what type of home they wanted, what their timeline actually is, so on and so forth. So that's a connection, not a conversation. So the conversation rate is about 4% when you're talking about just raw prospective dials. So that means you would have to have 1,000 dials in order to get to 40 conversations, to get to 4 appointments, to get to 2 appointments held, to get to 1.2 contracts, to get to 1 close. So now if you're thinking, I want to make sure I have at least 2 closes per month, you're looking at it saying, well, that would be 2,000 dials, right? That's $500 a week. That's 100 dials a day. Oh, that seems so daunting, right? Well, again, if you're new and you don't really have much of a pipeline, that's just what you got to do. You got to build it up. You got to make those sacrifices. You got to dial, and have conversations everywhere that you can in order to build up that pipeline. If you have WD-80, if you've got 80 people in that database, let's do the math on that. If you have 80 people in your working database, they're going to be a bit all over the timeline map, right? You're going to have some of them, like I said, that are probably around a year out, some of them that are 8 months out, some of them that are 6 months out, some of them that are 3 months. If you have been in this business so long that you've got such a great database and systems, and maybe you have ISAs working for your team, that you can have 30-day databases or 90-day databases, well, that's even more so. I'm talking about a spread database that basically goes from right now to about a year, maybe a little bit over a year when it comes to people that you've built true rapport with. Now, if somebody is a year out, we're going to make calls to them once every 2 months. If somebody's 6 months out, we're going to make calls to them once a month. If somebody's within 3 months, we're going to be making weekly calls to them. And if somebody's right now, we're probably making a couple calls a week to them because things are changing, new homes are coming up, so on and so forth. Now that database of 80 people, they're much more likely to answer your phone. And the closer they are to actually transacting business, the higher the likelihood of them answering your call or calling you back is. In general, I'm going to say that your entire database is going to, on average, have somewhere around 2.5 calls per month. Right? Those are the ones that are weekly, which will be 4 calls per month. The ones that are even more than weekly, the ones that are monthly, the ones that are bi-monthly will average out to about 2.5 calls per month. So that means 200 calls to your database, right? Because it's 80 times 2.5, that would be 200 calls, which means you're gonna have 50 calls per week, 50 dials per week into your database. Now you're gonna actually average an answer rate of 44% or 22 calls on those particular people. Now, when I say answer rate, does it mean they answer on the first time you call? Not necessarily. They may call you back. However, you don't have to call them a second time because they saw your number, they're calling you back, or they're responding to a text of yours. However, one way or another, you are able to engage that conversation with them. That's 22 of the conversations. Now remember, you're looking for 40 conversations complete. So if you're looking for 18 conversations, then that's at a 4% rate. That's 350 prospecting calls. So now you've actually got 400 calls in order to convert one piece of business to a closing. Now let's say hypothetically, you said you wanted to get to 2 closings per month. Well, that would be 800 calls. And if you're looking at 800 calls on a monthly basis, you're looking at 200 calls per week or 40 calls per day. That makes things a lot easier. Again, if you've got a great CRM that actually tells you when to call your clients based on where they are in stages in that WD-80, just go through those lists. When you run through those lists, all of a sudden you're going to get answers. When you get those answers, you're going to be able to talk to these people. When you talk to these people, that's going to result in business. So I just chunked you down from 1,000 dials to 400 dials, just like that. Now, use these numbers and blow them up how you'd like. Let's say you say, hey, I want to get to 50 closings or 48 closings. I want 4 closings a month. Well, guess what? That 400 needs to be weekly then, because that's 1 per week. And there you go. You got your 50 or 52 closings a year, depending on vacations or what have you. So now you're in that position where you've got 400 calls per week. That's 80 calls per day. Now you're calling your database just as much as you're calling prospects. Now you might say, well, wait a second. Why would I just double up or triple up on my database? You just said 400 calls every 2 weeks. Now you're saying 400 calls a week. Well, that's true. But here's the thing. As you prospect more to fill up that pipeline to get those closings, again, instead of you having a database that's, say, a 12-month window database, you are chunking it down to a 6-month or even a 90-day. As I mentioned, 90-day people, now you're calling them weekly versus calling those 12-month people once every 2 months. And that's an 8x dial rate. And that's going to be a much higher conversation rate. So that's actually how you increase that. So when you go from 12 to 24 to say 48 or 50, you're not actually calling the same WD-80. You're reconstructing your WD-80 to be a lot more people that are much closer to transacting business. So while you're calling the same person multiple times, it's not actually the same people within the database because you don't have that 9-month person. You've replaced that 9-month person with a 2.5-month person. You've replaced that 12-month person with a 3-month person, and your 80 is contained within that much tighter window, which requires more calls because they are hot to trot. They're ready to do business and they're ready to do it now, which means, again, out of 80 people, if you've got 80 people that are within 90 days closing 4 a month, 5 a month, that shouldn't be a big deal at all. You're talking about closing 12 or 15 out of 80 that you're potentially working with that all say that they want to transact business within the next 90 days, or say, even if we went to 6 months, those are still very feasible numbers. So again, more calls can equal more conversations, but it's not all created equally. Calls with people that you've already built rapport with and they already know you are going to be a much higher answer rate than those that aren't. So instead of just multiplying everything by the overall calls, including the prospecting calls, look at what your rates are for those people that you know versus your rates for the people that you don't know. And let's look at blending those in order to achieve that 40 conversation per closed deal ratio. I hope all this math helps you and makes you look at it in a different perspective, makes you really think about it going, I can do that. I've made those calls to those prospects. You know what? I've actually been doing more calling to prospect lists than I've been doing in follow-up to my own database. I didn't want to annoy them. I didn't want to make them upset. However, that's where more of your conversations and closings will occur. And that's how you can really enhance your business and take it to the next level in rapid speed.